Quentin, let's talk about something else, Jimmy said, his eyes narrowing. There's been a lot of chatter lately about some interesting parties you've attended. Specifically Diddy's parties. You know, the ones from the early 2000s, 2010s. The ones people are calling, let's say, legendary for all the wrong reasons. The audience murmured, sensing the shift. Tarantino's grin faltered, his fingers twitching on the armrest. "What are you getting at, Jimmy?" he asked, his voice low, almost a growl. Jimmy didn't flinch. "I'm talking about the rumors, pretty, persistent ones, that you were a regular at Diddy's bashes. The kind of parties where things got wild. Hookup rooms, Quentin. People are saying you were spotted in them, with other celebrities, doing things most folks wouldn't put on their resume." The crowd gasped, a ripple of shock spreading through the studio. Tarantino's face darkened, his jaw tightening. "You're really going there, huh? On live TV? That's bold, even for you." Jimmy leaned back, unfazed, his voice laced with a mix of sarcasm and accusation. "Bold? Maybe. But when stories keep popping up about you in rooms with, what, baby oil and God knows what else, people start asking questions. I mean, come on, Quentin, baby oil. Were you directing a movie in there or something else entirely?" The audience erupted in uneasy laughter, but the tension was palpable. Tarantino's eyes flashed with anger, his cool demeanor cracking. "You think you can just throw that out there? Smear me with some tabloid garbage? You don't know what you're talking about, Jimmy." "Oh, I know enough," Jimmy shot back, his tone turning deadly serious. "I've heard the stories. People saw you at those parties, Quentin. They saw what went on. Drugs, hookups, rooms where anything went. A-listers, models, you name it, all tangled up in Diddy's world. And you were right there, weren't you? Not just watching, but participating." Tarantino shot up in his seat, his voice rising. "You're crossing a line, man. You don't get to sit there and play judge and jury. You think you're clean? You think your hands are spotless in this town? Don't act like you're above it." The crowd was on edge now, some cheering, others whispering. Jimmy held up a hand, his smirk returning but colder. "I'm not the one with witnesses claiming they saw me in a hookup room with a bottle of baby oil, Quentin. That's you, and people are talking, co-stars, assistants, even security from those parties. They're saying you weren't just a guest, you were deep in it." Tarantino's face was a storm of rage and disbelief. He leaned forward, pointing a finger. "You're fishing, Jimmy. You're desperate for clicks, for headlines. You think you can drag my name through the mud with this? I've been in this game longer than you, and I know how this works. You're nothing without your little gotcha moments." Jimmy didn't back down. "Gotcha moments? This isn't a game, Quentin. People are coming forward. They're naming names. Yours keeps coming up. You were at those parties, weren't you? The ones where Diddy's crew made sure everyone left their morals at the door?" The audience was silent now, hanging on every word. Tarantino's hands clenched into fists, his voice low and dangerous. "You want to talk about morals? Look in the mirror, Jimmy. You're sitting there, acting like you're exposing some big scandal, but you're just feeding the machine. You're no better than the tabloids you pretend to hate." Jimmy's eyes glinted, sensing blood in the water. "Maybe, but I'm not the one dodging the question. Were you there, Quentin, in those rooms? Because I've got sources saying you weren't just a bystander. They're saying you were in the thick of it, parties that make Caligula look tame. You gonna deny it?" Tarantino stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "You're out. Of your depth, Kimmel. You think you can corner me? You think this is gonna make you look like some hero? You're a clown in a suit, and this—" He gestured to the set, the audience, the cameras. "This is your circus." Jimmy stood too, his voice cutting through the tension. "A clown? Maybe. But I'm not the one running from the truth. You were at those parties, Quentin. People saw you. They saw what you did. And they're talking. You can't outrun that." The crowd erupted, some cheering, others booing. Tarantino's face was a mask of fury, his eyes locked on Jimmy. For a moment it seemed like he might lunge across the desk. Instead he ripped off his mic, the feedback screeching through the studio. "You're done, Jimmy," he snarled, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "You're gonna regret this." As Tarantino stormed toward the exit, the audience roared, a mix of shock and excitement. Jimmy stood frozen, his smirk gone, replaced by a flicker of unease. The cameras panned to the empty chair, the stage lights glaring. The show cut to commercial, but the damage was done. The confrontation was raw, unscripted, and far from over. The studio lights flickered back on as the show returned from commercial, the audience still buzzing, their whispers a low hum of anticipation. Jimmy Kimmel stood behind his desk, his posture rigid, the unease from moments ago replaced by a calculated calm. The empty chair where Quentin Tarantino had sat loomed like a silent accusation. But Jimmy wasn't done. He faced the audience, his voice steady but laced with defiance. "Well, folks, that was something," Jimmy said, forcing a half smile. "I guess some people can't handle the truth coming out on live TV." The crowd erupted, some cheering, others murmuring in disbelief. He raised a hand, silencing them. "But let's be real. When you're caught in the spotlight, you either own it or you run. And Quentin? He ran." Backstage, the chaos was palpable. Producers scrambled, headsets crackling with urgent orders. The control room was a storm of voices debating whether to pivot to the next segment or lean into the firestorm. Jimmy's earpiece buzzed with a producer's voice. "Keep it light, Jimmy. Don't double down." But Jimmy's eyes gleamed with something reckless. He ignored the warning. "Let's talk about why Quentin bolted," Jimmy continued, his tone sharpening. "Those parties, Diddy's parties, weren't just your average Hollywood soirees. We're talking about rooms where the lights were low, the music was loud, and the rules? Non-existent. People who were there, caterers, security, even some guests, say it was like stepping into another world. Hookup rooms, folks. Not just rumors. Witnesses. They're saying Quentin was a regular, slipping into those back rooms where, let's just say, baby oil wasn't for massages." The audience gasped. A mix of shock and morbid curiosity. Jimmy paced the stage, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Picture this. A-listers, models, wannabe stars, all packed into these mansions. Drugs flowing like water, bottles of baby oil stacked like party favors. And Quentin, our auteur, our genius director, was allegedly right there, not just watching, but in it. People saw him, folks. They saw him in rooms where things went down that would make your skin crawl." The crowd was electric now, hanging on every word. Jimmy leaned into the camera, his voice taking on a grave edge. "I'm not here to gossip. I'm here because people are talking, and they're tired of the silence. They're tired of powerful people dodging accountability. Quentin wants to call me a clown? Fine. But clowns tell the truth sometimes, and the truth is, those parties weren't innocent. They were dark, and Quentin's name keeps coming up." Backstage, a figure moved in the shadows. Tarantino hadn't left the building. He stood just out of sight, his face a mask of fury, listening to Jimmy's every word. A stagehand approached, whispering, "Mr. Tarantino, you should go. This is getting messy." But Quentin waved him off, his eyes locked on the stage. He wasn't done either. Jimmy, oblivious to Tarantino's lingering presence, pushed further. "I've got a source, a former assistant from one of those parties. They told me something chilling. They said Quentin wasn't just a guest. He was a fixture. They saw him in those hookup rooms, surrounded by people who weren't there to talk about movies. They said it was like he was holding court, like he owned the place. And when things got extreme, he didn't flinch, he leaned in." The audience was silent now, the weight of the accusations sinking in. Jimmy's voice softened, but the intensity remained. I'm not saying this to tear anyone down. I'm saying it because people deserve to know. Hollywood's been hiding stuff like this for too long. Diddy's parties, the things that happened there, they're not just rumors. They're a stain. And Quentin, you can't just storm off and pretend it didn't happen. A sudden commotion broke the tension. From the wings, Tarantino's voice boomed, echoing through the studio before he even stepped into the light. You want to keep going, Jimmy? You want to keep digging your grave? The audience gasped as Quentin stormed back onto the stage, his mic back on, his face red with rage. The cameras swung to catch him, the producers scrambling to keep up. Jimmy turned, startled but recovering quickly. "Quentin, you're back. Got something to say, or you just here to yell some more?" Tarantino stopped inches from Jimmy, his finger jabbing the air. "You're a coward, Kimmel. You think you can hide behind your desk, throwing out lies, and call it truth? You don't know me. You don't know what went on. You're just chasing clout, and it's pathetic." The crowd roared, split between cheers and boos. Jimmy held his ground, his voice cutting through the noise. "Lies? Then set the record straight, Quentin. Tell us you weren't there. Tell us you didn't see what everyone else saw. Rooms full of drugs, sex, and people losing themselves. Tell us you weren't part of it." Tarantino's eyes burned, his voice low and venomous. "You want a story? Here's one. You're a hack who's been coasting on cheap laughs for years. You're not exposing anything. You're just jealous of people who actually create something. You want to talk about stains? Look at your career." The audience erupted, the tension crackling like a live wire. Jimmy's face tightened, but he didn't back down. "My career? At least I'm not dodging questions about hookup rooms, Quentin. You can insult me all you want, but you're not answering the question. Were you there or not?" Tarantino laughed, a bitter, jagged sound. "You're obsessed, aren't you? You think you've got me cornered? You're nothing, Jimmy. Nothing. And when this blows up in your face, don't come crying to me." He turned to leave again, the crowd roaring, but Jimmy's voice cut through. "Run again, Quentin, but you can't outrun the truth." Tarantino froze at the edge of the stage, his back to Jimmy, his shoulders tense. The cameras zoomed in, catching the moment, the studio holding its breath. The studio was a pressure cooker, the air thick with anticipation, as Quentin Tarantino stood frozen at the stage's edge, his silhouette sharp against the glaring lights. The crowd's roar faded into a tense hush, every eye locked on him. Jimmy, Kimmel's words, "Run again, Quentin, but you can't outrun the truth," hung like a guillotine. The cameras tightened on Tarantino's back, his shoulders rigid, his hands clenched into fists. For a moment it seemed he might walk away again, leaving the accusations unanswered. But then he turned, slow and deliberate, his face a storm of fury and defiance. "You want the truth, Jimmy?" Tarantino's voice was low, dangerous, cutting through the silence. He stepped back toward the desk, his eyes blazing. "You think you can handle it? You're not ready for what's real in this town. You're playing a game you don't understand." Jimmy stood his ground, his expression a mix of challenge and curiosity. "Then enlighten me, Quentin. Stop dodging and tell us. Were you at Diddy's parties? Were you in those hookup rooms? Because the stories aren't going away, and neither am I." The audience leaned forward, breathless. Tarantino's lips curled into a bitter smirk, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of something else. Cornered, maybe even afraid. "You're so desperate for a scandal, aren't you?" he said, his voice rising. "You think you've got me pinned. With your little sources, your whispers from nobodies who'd sell their own kids for a headline. Yeah, I was at parties, Diddy's, others. Hollywood's a small world, Jimmy. You don't get to my level without rubbing shoulders with the wrong people sometimes," the crowd murmured, a mix of shock and vindication. Jimmy seized the opening, his voice sharp. "So you admit it? You were there, in those mansions, with the drugs, the baby oil, the rooms where anything went." You weren't just passing through, Quentin. People saw you in those rooms, participating. Tarantino's smirk vanished, replaced by a snarl. You're twisting it, Kimmel. You think you've got the whole story? You don't. Those parties were chaos, sure. People did stupid things. I saw stuff. Everybody did. But you're painting me as some kind of ringleader, and that's a lie. You're fishing for blood, and you don't care who you hurt. Jimmy leaned forward, his voice dropping to a chilling calm. I'm not fishing, Quentin. I'm repeating what people saw. A security guard from one of those nights said you weren't just a bystander. You were in a room, surrounded by people, calling the shots like it was one of your movie sets. Drugs, hookups, things that'd make most people sick. You didn't just see it. You were part of it. The audience gasped, the accusation landing, like a punch. Tarantino's face flushed, his hands trembling with rage. You're disgusting, Jimmy. You think you can sit there, all high and mighty, and judge me? You think you're clean? This whole town's dirty. You've been to parties. You've seen things. Don't act like you're some saint. Jimmy's eyes narrowed, his voice steady but laced with venom. I'm not perfect, Quentin, but I'm not the one with witnesses saying I was knee-deep in Diddy's freak shows. You can deflect all you want, but you're not answering the question. Were you in those rooms or not? The crowd erupted, chanting, Answer! Answer! Tarantino's eyes darted to the audience, then back to Jimmy, his composure cracking. You want an answer? Fine. I was at some parties. I saw things. Maybe I stayed too long, got too close. But I wasn't running anything. I wasn't Diddy. You want to crucify someone? Start with him. Or better yet, look at yourself, Jimmy. You're not exposing truth. You're chasing ratings. Jimmy shook his head, his voice cold. Ratings? This isn't about ratings. It's about accountability. People trusted you, Quentin. Fans, actors, crews. They looked up to you. And now they're hearing you were in rooms where people were used, where lines were crossed. You can't just shrug that off. Tarantino stepped closer, his voice a low growl. You're a hypocrite, Kimmel. You think this little stunt makes you a hero? You're tearing people down to prop yourself up. And when this backfires, and it will, you'll be the one left in the dirt. The tension was unbearable, the studio crackling with energy. Jimmy opened his mouth to fire back, but Tarantino cut him off, ripping his mic off again and tossing it to the floor with a screech of feedback. I'm done with this circus, he spat, his voice echoing. You're not worth my time. He stormed off the stage, this time for good, shoving past a stunned stagehand. The crowd exploded, a chaotic mix of boos, cheers, and gasps. Jimmy stood alone, the camera zooming in on his face, part defiance, part uncertainty. He forced a smile, addressing the audience. Well, folks, that's showbiz. Sometimes the truth hits hard. The show cut to commercial, but the aftermath was immediate. Social media lit up, clips of the confrontation spreading like wildfire. Hashtags like Kimmel vs. Tarantino and Diddy parties trended, with fans and critics tearing into both men. Some praised Jimmy for calling out Tarantino. Others slammed him for ambushing a guest. The accusations, hookup rooms, baby oil, drugs, were dissected endlessly, with anonymous accounts claiming more names would surface. By morning, Jimmy's ratings took a hit, the backlash painting him as a bully who'd crossed a line. Tarantino's silence only fueled the fire, his reputation teetering as old stories resurfaced. In the end, the confrontation left scars. Jimmy's show limped on, but the trust was fractured. The incident became a cautionary tale in Hollywood. Push too hard, and the whole stage collapses. Respect and professionalism, it turned out, were more than just buzzwords. They were the line between a career and a catastrophe. And as the dust settled, one thing was clear. No one walked away clean.